All right, good afternoon. The Washington State Department of Agriculture would like to make an announcement that we've had a detection of the highly pathogenic avian influenza in a backyard, non-commercial, non-poultry flock in Spokane County. The affected flock is a mix of about 75 geese, chickens, ducks, and guinea fowl. And we have a team responding this afternoon to euthanize those birds. It's a really unfortunate detection, but we are able to quickly respond and contain this disease quickly to avoid any kind of spread or transmission to other farms. We had a private veterinarian submit a dead goose last week, and prior to death, the bird was showing neurologic signs, and it was actually a goose that was not acting afraid of humans. So it was allowing the owners to come up and pet it, which was not normal behavior for this bird. It was shaking its head, it wasn't moving, and it was walking really abnormally. So those would all be consistent with neurologic signs. Typically in waterfowl, both wild and domestic waterfowl, we're more likely to see these types of neurologic signs, whereas in birds like chickens or turkeys, guinea fowl, we see more classic signs of avian influenza, which are respiratory signs. So we might see discolored combs, difficulty breathing, nasal discharge, ocular discharge, and swelling. So those are the types of things that you want to keep an eye out for. The presence of the H5N1 avian influenza virus in the flock was detected by WSU Waddle, and then it was confirmed by our National Veterinary Services Laboratory just today. So it's been a lot of information in a short amount of time that we've had to kind of get this information and be able to respond quickly. So this is the second detection of the virus in Washington State this year, and we have no commercial detection. So there's no commercial flocks within the vicinity of this backyard flock, and there have been no detections in our commercial flocks. We continue to work with our commercial poultry industry to be sure that they have implemented their enhanced biosecurity plans to really try to protect their flocks. We quarantined the facility today, and that affected premises will be under quarantine for up to 150 days while that property lays fallow, which means there's no birds that will be allowed to be repopulated there until we've had enough time to allow the premises to be cleaned and disinfected and allowed enough fallow time or enough time to go by that that virus has been eliminated from the environment. And that will help us reduce the risk of any kind of transmission from that premises to any other flocks in the area. We know that any of the birds that have been euthanized today will be going to landfill and they will not enter the food system. And we know right now, based on CDC's recommendations, that there haven't really been any cases or true infection of the H5N1 with this strain in humans. However, we'll continue to monitor both our responders and the owners on the farm for any kind of clinical signs that are usually consistent with flu-like symptoms. We are advising all of our commercial and backyard flock owners to continue to be vigilant with your biosecurity measures and surveillance. There's lots of information on the USDA website, on the Defend the Flock website, on lots of different biosecurity measures you can put into play. But the ones that we really are concerned about are the highest risk factors. So typically when we respond to these cases or we do epidemiological investigations on the flocks that seem to be impacted, it tends to be those flocks that have mixed flocks. So there are flocks that have chickens and turkeys and they are mixed with domestic ducks or geese. It's a very high risk situation, especially when those ducks and geese and chickens have access to a pond or a water source on the property that could potentially be contaminated with fecal material from wild waterfowl, or where there might be direct contact with wild waterfowl and domestic waterfowl or domestic poultry. So we really want to encourage flock owners out there to keep their birds away from ponds, away from shared water sources, preferably bring them in or bring them under cover. So if you have an outdoor run, it would be great if you could cover that outdoor run. or that you could prevent some free ranging of those flocks for some period of time, at least for a few more weeks, until we think that the waterfowl have, migrated north and have decreased the risk. But I think one of the biggest things that backyard flocks could do right now would be to separate your gallinaceous birds, which would be turkeys, chickens, guinea fowl, from any kind of waterfowl, whether, domestic, so geese, any kind of ducks that you might have, and then keeping all of those birds separate from wild waterfowl and shorebirds that are likely to carry this virus. We also know that this year's a little bit different. The National Wildlife Services has confirmed that there's over 40 species of wild birds that have been confirmed positive with the H5N1 virus this year. So we know there's a lot of viral load in the environment, and that wild birds are the biggest risk factor for disease transmission. So again, we just encourage you to especially pay attention to keeping the contact with wild birds and wild waterfowl and your domestic flocks separate. If you do see any clinical signs in your flock, and as I mentioned before, if you have chickens or turkeys, typically we see sudden death. You might see respiratory signs. Typically we see high morbidity and mortality. And what that means is there's a lot of birds that are sick or a lot of birds that are dead. So if you wake up this morning and you have one dead chicken, probably not time to get alarmed about that. But if you have 2, 3, 4, or half your flock, 40% of your flock, or a larger percent of your flock is showing clinical signs, they're sick, they're depressed. If you have waterfowl and they're neurologic, those would all be reasons that you would want to call our sick bird hotline. So our WSDA Avian Health Program is led by Dr. Dana Dobbs. She's our avian health lead. And the sick bird hotline is 1-800-606-3056. If you have wild birds, or you find dead wild birds, or you see wild geese or wild ducks exhibiting neurologic signs, or you see sick or dead wild birds, including raptors like bald eagles or any other birds of prey, we would encourage you to contact the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And they do have an online reporting tool. So if you just put that into your search engine, you should be able to find that. So we are working very closely with our USDA APHIS Veterinary Service partners. We have a great team here in Washington, both on the federal and the state side, for responding to your sick bird calls and responding to these cases where we have sick birds. And I would just really encourage you that if you do have an event, don't be afraid to call. I know people get really worried about us coming out and doing depopulation right away, but we would never come out and do any kind of response unless we have a confirmed test result. And at the end of the day, euthanasia is a much more humane choice for these birds that get infected, because death is ultimately the worst indicator of welfare. If you're dying and you're suffering of avian influenza, it is not a fun way to go. So it's a very unfortunate situation, but the quicker that we can find out about these cases, the quicker we can contain this disease, then the better chance we have of not spreading it to other people's flocks. And really, at the end of the day, hopefully we can keep more birds safe and, really make sure that we can contain the disease as quickly as possible. So just a reminder that when we think about disease mitigation and we think about prevention, we always want to remember how the disease is spread. So just remember that avian influenza can be spread in multiple ways. Typical way it's spread is through waterfowl, which we've talked about a lot today, but it can also be spread from fecal contamination of the environment. So if you know that waterfowl land in your backyard and could have defecated there, that's a risk factor, because we know that the virus can survive in the environment for weeks and maybe even up to a month or longer if environmental conditions are correct. And so right now we've had a pretty cool, wet spring. So we think that virus and that viral load can remain in the environment for a long time. So don't feel like you're safe yet. So we want to make sure we keep these birds that usually free range indoors as much as possible. We also know that the virus can be transmitted through the air. So there is some potential for aerosolation of the virus from one flock to another. So we want to be cognizant of that. And also through shared feed sources or shared water sources. That's another way we can spread this. We can also spread it on our own person. We can spread it on our shoes. We can spread it on our clothes. so we can spread it if we share equipment. So we really want to make sure that, keep visitors off of your property. Make sure that, you're changing your shoes when you get home. If you go to the feed store, it's not ridiculous to come home and disinfect your footwear or wear different footwear on your farm. These are all small things we can do to help prevent disease transmission. So hopefully I've answered most of your questions today with regards to this latest detection of highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1 in a small non-commercial backyard non-poultry flock in Spokane County. But if you have additional questions or concerns, you certainly can access our website at agr.wa.gov/bird flu, or you can call our office at 1-360-902-1878. And we also have our communications office, Amber Betts and Carla Salp. They do such a great job, and you can contact them at 360-628-3477. And I'm also happy to take additional calls and questions as needed, either by my phone or through email. My email address is A as in Amber and my last name Itle, ITLE, @agr.wa.gov. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and we look forward to hearing from those folks out there that might have additional questions or concerns. Thanks so much.